Okay, my husband and I are a homeschooling family, and I'm also a preschool teacher. I'm wondering how Common Core is going to affect us as a homeschool family. I know down the road our concerns, thankfully our children are just starting kindergarten, but the college test alignment, if we do not teach our children Common Core in the home, that they would struggle entry tests for college. What can we do to prepare or keep Common Core out of our homeschool family?
Well, one of the main purposes in aligning the SAT to a Common Core curriculum, and training as I call it, is for that very reason, is to broaden the net to capture your private schools and your homeschoolers. What I would implore all of you to do, and after seeing some of this stuff today and seeing what the ideology is and philosophy is behind this, we have got to remind ourselves that we are the expert on our child. We are the first and final authority. What they say is success is not what we say is success. As you said, they're deciding how your child, how your human capital can basically honor and support the state. What call, where they can be plugged in to be the most useful for the state. I say if we're going to allow that, then we are done. This is all for naught. One of the things that I met with Superintendent Jim Ribb, who I believe also covers the Archdiocese up in this area for Catholic schools. He's from the Cincinnati Archdiocese. Met with him for over an hour and a half. I kept asking the same question. Why? Why, Dr. Rick? These standards are untested, unproven anywhere. Why? If it was about better outcomes, did the public schools not come to you and say, why do you always kick our rear? Why are you adapting to them? Well, he kept saying, all these are better standards. Look at them. Have you read them? I don't need to read them. You have a centuries proven better system. Faith formation first, the rest falls in line. That's the order of Catholic education. He eventually answered me under duress, we were afraid we'll lose our funding. I said, I knew the answer, but I wanted you to have to say it.
You got you right where they want you.
It comes down to, you take a bite of the apple and they've got you. But one of the other things I mentioned to him, I said, so, because it talked about not just the funding, but the test, basically the coercion of the outcomes on the test, and keeping Catholic students on par with public school students. I said, again, sir, you are defaulting to the measures of the secular world. You know your academic standards are better. Take it a step further. If this is all about college entrance exams, why isn't there a Catholic college entrance exam? I said, you own 80% of all private K-12 education. You have dozens of higher ed institutions. Why don't you have a college entrance exam? Why don't you determine what this Catholic graduate should be able to do for college level work? But that fell on deaf ears. But if you take that even into a general, what I would call a liberty-minded environment, if enough parents say, we're not going to be coerced into that. We will reject your definition of success for our family and for our child. There's only one college in America that does not take some type of federal funding. It's Hillsdale, where Terrence Moore teaches history. In an old school America, what would have happened? The free market would dictate. If enough parents would embrace their child's future and not leave it to the state, there will be 100 Hillsdales. Because that's what free market does. It fills a vacuum. And there should be a huge vacuum after what they've done to us in public education. When we start abandoning their programs, and you can do that again, as Lincoln said, by just opting out as a start. When you abandon their programs, they will default to us rather than us adapt to them. So I would just say, do not fall prey to, again, with the preschool level too. This has been the power of incrementalism, the power of the creep. They've desensitized you to so many things that, you've been able to get up to your neck in the water and now you can't get out. But like I said, to me, there's no option. It isn't whether we can do it. Somebody mentioned about, well, what do we do? Governor Kasich will just veto it. That is not my concern, what Governor Kasich does. Legislators have jobs. I should first say, we have a job. We actually elect representatives. They have a job to put their vote on record, and then Governor Kasich can do the same. And John Quincy Adams has a quote that gets me through many a day, and it is, duty is ours, results are God's. I can't carry the burden about what Governor Kasich's going to do, but I darn well am going to get out there and do everything I can to protect the future of my kids and my grandkids. That is where I have to go, and I hope that you will do it as well.
If you could, Heidi, talk a little bit about some of the pushback people will experience for opt-out, what it means to them, and a little bit about what's going on in Salina, Ohio, and is this a toothless monster that we need not fear?
It most certainly is. Again, the threats really don't have any power behind them. And I just was sent yesterday, and I haven't had time to read through it, but it was evidently, there's been a precedent set legally in Ohio, where someone back in 1998 sued the Ohio Department of Education and won a parents' and students' protection rights to assessments and testing. Basically, the parent has to have full access to the test itself, to the results of the test. The ODE was not supporting the Superintendent Steiner and Salina's idea that he can reject a parent's opt-out form. They did not claim to support that. They said he was acting out of order, so to speak, but nothing's happened to Superintendent Steiner. And his local board pretty much doubled down to cover for him. But again, the idea being that you are the first and foremost expert, even if it's not an idle threat, what can they do to your child that is more egregious than what they're doing by them complying? So they don't get a good grade in the 4th grade, to move to 5th grade. If enough kids do this, the system falls apart. And the whole system's based on this data. If you can only get 5 kids out of 20 in the classroom to take the assessment, the teacher can't be evaluated based on the Fed's criteria. I mean, the best thing that could happen to us, quite honestly, is to have the Feds take away our No Child Left Behind waiver. Because we've figured out how to get it done at a state level through our parents and our elected local school boards who our superintendent is supposed to answer to. I believe it would reset us if we lost our No Child Left Behind waiver and had to go back to doing it without the Feds.
I'm going to ask about private schooling. I was fortunate enough to go to Catholic school for 11 years. I do appreciate that. I realize probably that there is a large Catholic congregation here today, but also other denominations. You spoke about the Archbishop, the Diocese of Cincinnati, and I see in a lot of the paperwork how to get our legislators and contact them. How do we go about through our various religious affiliations like the Diocese of Toledo, and who should we contact there to start a push from that direction to bring the religious values into it also, so that they see it's not just a political conservative versus the other people. How do we go about that? Who do we contact? Is there something started already? And how could that be incorporated in the literature so that we can come at it from that angle also?
I'm not sure about Toledo. I do know up in that area there is a movement going on, and with a much more, accommodating superintendent than what we have in Cincinnati. Cincinnati superintendent's been used as a contrast nationally because the Archdiocese of Pittsburgh recently removed Common Core from their schools, and that made national headlines. But they had a quote from Dr. Rigg in that same article talking about why, our schools are going to keep them. But again, it comes down to the power of the purse, the collectivism. I mean, to me, there's a strong parallel of the Catholic Church. Again, and I use the Catholic Church. First off, I'm most familiar with them, but I teach, or I don't teach, I work at a private Christian academy. I'm the finance manager. So I see a lot of the financial pieces to how this works if you're a non-public chartered school. But with the Catholics, again, it's because they dominate that market, over 80%. And to me, the Catholic Church and the Republican Party share a lot of similarities. They've been infiltrated. And so the people, quite honestly, that are pulling the puppet strings are the ones in charge, and they're not who we think they are. I know in the Cincinnati Archdiocese, the curriculum director, I don't believe is even Catholic. So when you get that whole, when they change the agenda and they indoctrinate or bring in people who basically indoctrinate the rest of them, that's why you've got the social justice agenda. I believe that's why the Catholics were so on board with Common Core, because that is the theme of Common Core. It's social justice, it's equality, redistribution of wealth, global citizenship. You know, I mean, let's face it, right now the Catholics are looking for amnesty. You know, so it comes down to, again, we have laws in place that protect us from this very thing. And then we have lawmakers telling us there's nothing they can do. I mean, it's extremely discouraging at times and disappointing, but that's no excuse to give up. But again, remember who they are. They are your representative elected as a lawmaker. Of course there's something they can do. They put it in House Bill 1 and now somebody else can take it out. I mean, it's really no more complicated than that. But getting back to the Catholic, I don't know, quite honestly, if Toledo's anything like Cincinnati, I think you're almost better off to be dealing directly with your local parish, or maybe your parish school pastor, in the sense of, how long do you think we're going to pay extra money, extra tuition dollars versus our property taxes, just to have a cross hang on the wall? Because that's where they're headed. There'll be no difference. There won't even be time for Catholic religious instruction. They'll make sure that there isn't time. Because they hold, again, they're too far down now, too deep in the weeds with them to turn back. So it has to be that they have to be threatened, like the politician has to be threatened he's going to lose his seat, and the Catholic schools have to be threatened that they're going to lose their community, their tuition-paying community. To me, I have found not going for the ideology, because Dr. Britt believed that this was all politically based, what I was speaking from. He would much, again, the money is what's driving it. Money and votes. Those are the two triggers that seem to get anything done.
We can opt our kids out of the PARC test. Can we also opt our kids out of the Ohio achievement tests?
According to what I read yesterday, yes. Technically, you can opt your child out of anything you want. What they'll tell you is, well, then your child will, could potentially not be moved along in the system. But what I read yesterday guarantees is you can see that you are able to review the test. So rather than this threat or idle threat, whatever it may be, if you, I want to see the OAA test that my child's taking. But the problem with that is, unless it's in paper form, you will have no idea if what they took is what you saw. That is the other purpose for all these assessments having to be done online. They're also adaptive. Some students aren't taking the same test as Johnny sitting next to them because based on answers that they got correctly or not correctly, the next question varies. And if your child comes home and tells you, oh, I saw this on my online textbook, by 3 p.m. it could be gone. And that's happened already. This Pearson licensing program on all these iPads, that program only works on the school network. The child can't show you what he worked on at home. That's by design. With every step of this is to get the parent further and further away from their child's development, both morally and academically. I mean, that is the whole purpose of this. When you take math, and you can make math subjective, as they've done, and you can bleed social justice or revisionist history into ELA, There's a purpose in that. It's to say there's no absolutes. Your parents may tell you your parents don't know. Your religion may tell you that's the religious. They don't know. We know and you know that now. And so they're pitting a child, particularly the young children, against their parents. Because you have an authority figure in your teacher who you love and want to respect, and then you have your mom and dad. And I've had parents call me in tears over that. Because they said they're arguing with their child at the table, and they feel such a conflict in telling their child to go in and tell their teacher, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it your way. I mean, that puts the child, the burden they put on these children psychologically, which brings me, Roy Wagner, who is here today recording this, joyfully came and recorded the event April 9th in Columbus. Was anybody there for that? A few? Okay, fun. Well, he recorded the entire event. It's 3.5 hours long, but it's broken up into 7 segments, and he's gotten all that done for me. I just haven't got it up on my website yet. But one of the segments, 7 segments, is a child psychologist who speaks to how developmentally and appropriate the standards are. And that's just the standards themselves. That doesn't have anything to do with all the psychological issues of combating back and forth with your mom and your teacher and what's going on there. So there's so many elements of this that you can, say, well, that's the part that bothers me the most. Quite honestly, what should bother everybody the most isn't the quality of the standards. It is who's in charge of the standards. And the fact that you are now no longer the final authority, the first authority on your child, that they have negated and completely destroyed local school board authority. The superintendent, for all intent purposes, reports to Columbus. That's where he gets his marching orders, he or her, because that's where the purse strings are. So this is the final capstone in that destruction. That's what should bother everybody. All the other things are just ancillary to the basic premise.
My question is, and my understanding, and let me see if I can word this. Somewhere I read not very long ago that 4 states out of 50 did not buy into this program. I think it was Nevada, Arkansas, Texas, and I can't think of the other state. It doesn't matter. But 4 states did not buy in. But do you know why the 46 states bought in? Because money was dangling there, and it's my understanding the standards weren't even written.
Correct.
They bought in because of the money, without knowing the consequences. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the 4 states that didn't compete and race to the top and technically adopt Common Core by name, when they got their initial billions of dollars, particularly Texas, in order to get your state fiscal stabilization funds, you had to agree to those 4 general assurances, which were a common set of standards amongst the states that were college and career ready, as basically the feds would determine whether they were college and career ready. They weren't written yet, so they weren't Common Core, but it was the same set of standards. They just hadn't developed it into that rubric that you saw race to the top. One of the last bills that got passed in Texas before their session closed back in January was a college and career ready standards bill. Because they've been pushed up against the wall. They took those several $billion initially, even though they didn't compete in race to the top. In order to get those funds, they had to agree to these college and career ready standards as determined and dictated by the federal government. My guess is that Texas's college and career ready standards are probably 80+% Common Core, otherwise they wouldn't have passed the muster.
Wasn't just a month ago Indiana legislature voted to opt out of Common Core?
They did, and Governor Pence signed it, and then Governor Pence last week, actually it wasn't last week, it was Monday, voted basically to put in Common Core 2.0. And again, it comes right back to that very premise. Those standards were a cut and paste job. Over 80% were literally cut and paste. Same verbiage, but they are Common Core. Common Core, not that they're not going to get rid of any of their Common Core line textbooks, but it's because if he doesn't, he's going to have to finally cut that string with the federal government, and he's not willing to do it. They've all been coerced, they've all been bought off, and they've allowed their federal education dollars to become so large now they can't live without it. That's why Washington State, well, it'll be interesting to see what Washington State does now to their teachers, since they got their children behind it or revoked.
So as parents and educators, even if we opt out of Common Core, we should be very high alert of other standards coming in with a new and different meaning.
Yeah, which is, I believe anyway that that's part of what's going on in Columbus. They realize that as long as they keep the standards, they can give us a little bit of, make us feel like we've won something. By saying, oh, you know what, we're going to change the data piece of this. We're going to get rid of part, we'll go with something else. Again, the nucleus are the standards. And as long as they keep those standards in place, they can put all the other pieces back together. And as long as they keep those standards in place, for the most part, they'll be able to keep the feds off their back. Again, if they don't do all of the pieces necessary, those 4 assurances are all interdependent. Eventually, the feds will come calling, just like they did in Washington State. But don't fall for the idea that, oh, we're going to change the standards. They cannot be just a reiteration of Common Core.
We were told by one of our teachers that there'll be choices of books for the students or the teachers to use. So that sounds like a good thing up front. Now, will all of those books in their own way go according to Common Core, or will one be better than the other?
They'll all be aligned. There's a couple of issues there. First off, this isn't curriculum, so I don't understand why we have to have aligned textbooks. We've never had aligned textbooks. We've had state standards for how long? Since 1996. So the idea that we had to align textbooks, and these are just standards, that seems to me to be kind of incompatible. But on top of it, when this comes back again to homeschooling and private schools, there is an 80% plus monopoly on global textbook publishing. Pearson, who is a major player in Common Core, owns 80% of textbook publishing globally. Now, they've consumed some of these other smaller publishers like McGraw-Hill, but they've allowed them to keep their name so it doesn't look like such a monopoly, but it is. What your teachers are going to have the choice of is, here's your 3 Common Core line math books, which one would you like? There'll be no choice.
It makes it sound good.
Which is exactly where it gets back into what has happened to your private schools. Again, almost all private schools are chartered, non-public. You know your school has a charter if you're in a private school because if school buses pull up out front, you're a charter. You've also probably noticed if you're in a private school that's chartered, when you open the cover of the book up, there's a stamp saying what public school district that book belongs to. That's called auxiliary funds. That's what funds these textbooks. And as a chartered school, you're allowed so much money per head of students to get core curriculum, as they call it. Your core classes such as history, math, English. But that's also how they've gotten revisionist history and indoctrination into your private school. Because these schools usually exist on a shoestring budget, I know ours does. Any textbook we can buy with auxiliary funds, we do. But our history teachers have said the biggest change we could make at our school is to not get history books through auxiliary funds anymore, and to be able to buy true history that's not revisionist history. That would go farther than any other change we could make. And the Catholic schools suffer from the same thing. So, in regards to textbooks, there'll be no choice. This isn't, I always come back to, we're all common now, right? Why would you need a different choice? It's all intended to be common. All the collective thought. Yes?
What's the end game? What's the point of all this for big business and big politics?
Well, for big business, there's a couple elements you could come at it from. One being, this is a workforce development program, which it basically is. It's training. It's German-esque. That's what they do. Only it doesn't fit in American society because it's not traditional Americanism. It's not American instruction. But you're basically getting, to some extent, you're getting a workforce trained on the taxpayer's dime. And you're dictating it. You're working with the other players. So it's this crony capitalism, you know, to the nth degree. But you also, I look at a lot of these players like Exxon, Dell, some of these players, much like I did the healthcare carriers. They were all sitting around the table wanting Obamacare too, until they realized you're going to be destroyed ultimately. Now they're all crying foul. Oh my gosh, you know, we can't exist like this. Well, you did it to yourselves. You wanted a seat at the table, you got it, and now you've destroyed your industry. And I think that's what this does. I mean, in a true fascist society, the government owns all business. And for all intent and purposes, they're halfway there now. Look at all of the stimulus dollars that went to private industry. Look at Cylinder, right? So if you fear whether you can be competitive in that environment without the help of the government, when your competitor might get help from the government, you're going to sit at the table too. Because you're going to get with the program of how you can be the most successful. And again, the government has got to the point that they've become so entrenched in our corporate world that they're running that too. And I mean, like I said, the word for that, which people don't think about, you know, we hear communism and all that, we're halfway to a fascist society. There's a lot of parts of our industries in America that are much like Venezuela. And I don't know if it caught my attention, because it was shortly after that image of all 600 people sitting in the atrium that night in November. There was a picture on the front page of the Wall Street Journal of Venezuelans, and they had numbers put on their arms. That was the day you could go to the grocery store. The mile outside the grocery store, even with your number on your arm, was a mile long. And I thought, you know what? What a perfect comparison. You can either sit in the atrium and fight for your freedom, or you can wait a little while and you can get in line to go to the grocery store. That's the difference. You either live in liberty, you either have individual rights, personal responsibilities that precede your personal rights, or you live like Venezuela lives, under a dictator, under a fascist regime. And again, it comes back to, you know, Terrence Moore's book. And as I read out Brave New World, there was nothing beautiful in that slideshow, was there? Nothing beautiful at all. Nothing to feed our children's souls, their imaginations, their joy. It's all about training. And not training for their benefit. Again, I contend we are in Brave New World. We're just, you never realize at the time that you're making history, that you're a part of it. The Germans didn't either, but that's where we're headed. Yes?
Is not the Common Core embedded in the United Nations educational arm UNESCO?
It is. Bill Gates actually signed a contract to fund UNESCO. Yeah. The tentacles are, they're there. You don't even have to look very far, quite honestly. I usually don't bother to go there though, because in and of itself it's so insidious. And then, you know, of course, we all choose an agenda 20, you know, it's like, it is what it is, you know. And again, coming back to the Bush trilogy, Reagan took us out of UNESCO. George H.W. Bush, you know, he liked the New World Order idea and this global citizenship. And I just find that whole, Debbie Terrahart, state board president, likes to brag about this piece of legislation that was original source that gets taught in 11th grade history class. And, you know, I'm not, that gives me no relief or comfort at all. Because I can tell you that by the time a child in a public school system in Ohio leaves 3rd grade, they know more about Earth Day than President's Day. And they believe they're a global citizen. And they have responsibility for that. By the time you teach them the Constitution, and that's sparse too, in 11th grade from the original source, they don't care. They don't think that Constitution's any more reverent than anybody else's organizing document. Because they've been taught they're a global citizen. They've not been taught their values. the inherent value of being a citizen of the United States, what the responsibilities are to be here, and again, coming back to the presentation of colors, the idea of the price that's been paid on your behalf. I mean, I just find that, in my mind, quite honestly, this is it's clearly criminal, and I would quite honestly say it's treason. In our grandparents' day, this would be treason.
That's right.
Absolutely.
The young man's question about what's the end game, I would suggest that he read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Yeah.
2 of the rules is take over the healthcare system, take over the education system. That is a blueprint for complete socialization of any society.
Lenin said, give me the children for 4 years and you'll never unseat the seeds I've sown. You know, again, they know the youth are the future. And one of the other major agenda items with Alinsky was the homosexual agenda. And that permeates out, again, as you saw from kindergarten to 12th grade. Homosexuality is the norm. And again, coming back to this desensitization, back in September of last year, President Obama made a couple comments in public statements how he believed that sexuality standards did belong in kindergarten. Again, it's that desensitization. You hear that for a year or two, and then you're not even surprised when you see it come out of your backpack. That's worked up until now. And as I said, this is it. If this doesn't get us off our couch, this doesn't get us out trying to find somebody to truly represent us in the State House, then it's over. And I would contend that this is the most perfect situation for nullification because it's been determined. I mean, we don't have to argue over the Commerce Clause. We don't have to argue over precedents set at the U.S. Supreme Court. By constitutions at the U.S. and state level, education is a state function, absolutely without question. So there's no legality to be argued. So at this point, the idea that we could not nullify Common Core, some days I feel like that's maybe our better option trying to force a repeal bill, is to get a nullification effort started. Because that way, if you nullify it, then you don't have Common Core 2.0 either. And you don't have the schemes going on behind closed doors that you're not privy to as you're out trying to work with your legislator.
You had the slide up there about the national sexuality standards. Now, how would that appear on an agenda for this school day? For example, like my kids were in high school when they have to fill out their classes that they're going to take for the next semester or the next quarter, whatever. Is that actually like a class that would say national sexuality standards, or is that something that's incorporated like in a health class or science class? When and where would we see that?
Both. As you saw there, obviously the Catholic first grade classroom doesn't have, as a part of their lesson plan, teaching that homosexual families are equal to, as nuclear families. But it's there. And this was one of the things I found, that even at the school I'm at, initially, when some of our educators and our principals looking at the standards, it's like, well, we like that our science teacher now needs to talk to our ELA teacher, and, our math teacher is going to talk to our science teacher. That all sounds good, and I think, in some ways, the education world is kind of that way, this whole collaboration effort. In some ways, groupthink. I think that's why we've got so many of these group projects, which I detest. But then when you see what they're actually using it for, and it is just that. It is to take sexuality standards and put them in the reading units. Many of you may have heard of the Gettysburg fiasco that went on, this is probably maybe 2 months ago now, where the Gettysburg Address had to be read in what they're calling close reading. There was no context for the Gettysburg Address. You were only allowed to read the text and answer questions based on the text. The teacher was not allowed to speak to the fact that this occurred during the Civil War, that this was a reverent ground of the fallen. Nothing about that was allowed to be spoken. That wasn't a history class. That was a literature class. that it's so insidious. And I've often thought, you know, how do you beat a deviant without becoming a deviant? And there's days where it's like, you know, I feel like I'm starting to fall to their ways of like, you know, the means justify the ends. And I'm on the good side, so I thought, you know what? You can't. Again, it comes back to you have to know who you are, know what you want for your child, know you're the first and final authority, and let God do the rest. Because we cannot become them. You can't become that of which you fight. And I see, quite honestly, I see some of that happening, and I certainly don't encourage it, but you know, everybody has their own means of doing things. But I would encourage you to be always on the up and up about it, and not fall prey to the fact that we are working for the right reasons, so therefore we'll have to bend some rules. Because eventually they'll come back to harm us.
Yes, I was in Germany last year, in Nuremberg, Germany, and I forget exactly how the woman stated it, but she said, for those people who fail to remember the past, you will be condemned because history will repeat itself. And I've never forgotten that. I have never forgotten that.
We're living it, yeah.
And we're heading that way.
That's one of the things that, you know, Terrence Moore points out in the selection of a Ronald Reagan speech that's in the standards. You know, this is in most of our current history, our memories of those who are still alive. And yet it's being completely retold, as though Gorbachev brought down the wall. This isn't where we can't discount what our children are being taught. The problem is they know, most people don't have any idea what their children are being taught. We gave up that responsibility long ago. You know, I mean, they practically come in, wake them up, brush their teeth for you, and put them on the school bus. I mean, it has become this delinking of the child from the family and from the first authority. And that's first and foremost what we have to demand back. We have to reclaim our children and reclaim their classroom if we're ever to restore anything. This has been a kind of a burn my side ever since I got involved in the Liberty Movement in 2009. Every single public policy issue you're working on is temporary. If you're successful, it's temporary. Because they are graduating by the hundreds of thousands, little minds of mush, after 12 years, who have no use for your ideology. Because they don't know anything. They don't know what they don't know. If we are going to change the paradigm of our country and the direction of where we're headed and restore our country, we've got to get in the kindergarten, into the classroom, or maybe we need to get 0 to 5 at birth. The idea shouldn't be how quick can we get children away from their mother. It should be how much influence can we let their mother have. I mean, my parents used to think they owned the school when they showed up, because technically they do. That is not the way now. I mean, it was unbelievable to witness what happened to Sarah Lewis in Salina. I mean, that is the only thing I think has kind of kept me going through this, is I don't have a child in the system any longer. My baby graduated last May, and I thought, I don't know how these moms are doing this, who are living this and watching their children be subjected to basically retaliation from people of authority who have been entrusted to their care. I mean, it's quite honestly, there's a reason they think they could go that far, and it's because we haven't called them out yet.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Can you explain what happens also at the college level? I work in a primary care office, and we take med students. And we asked them a lot, what's their stance on Obama and that. And they said, well, before I went to college, I believed I was conservative or Republican. And now that I'm in college, I see it differently. And what's going on there that's changing the minds?
Well, I mean, it began in higher ed in the late 60s, 70s. If you chart the path of when we delinked from true local control, parental control, and the feds got involved in education. In the early, you had, Roe v. Wade, you had Bibles taken out of schools, then you had prayer taken out of schools, and these are public schools. Okay? Then you had the development of the U.S. Department of Education. If you chart the outcomes, both culturally and academically, since that start, since the linking of the community to the child and to the parent, it's a linear progression downward. We went to the moon before the U.S. Department of Education. We led the world in innovation before the U.S. Department of Education. Again, we've doubled our budget in Ohio, and we still have a crisis. Why are we allowing those who took us here to try and find our way out? They have no incentive to get us out of this. Again, there's job security in this. There's a lot of money to be made in this. You know, coming back to the industries, particularly those involved in education. Education is a $600 billion industry in America. That's huge. These corporatists, I mean, that's just big waiting to be captured. And if all you have to do is buy off your local politician and work your way up the ladder, I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. That's why we don't lead in innovation any longer. There's no reason to. The government picks the winners and losers. Yes?
I just have a comment. I'm an educator over here at Glandorf, and from my perspective of being in school, prior to being an educator, I worked in the business world for 10 years. And it seems like you're trying to run our schools like a business, and you made that connection for me today. And when you're in the business world and you're given a goal of what you have to produce for the year, you don't wait till the end of the year to see if you made your goals. You have to have a lot of data, not bi-monthly, weekly, to see where you're at. And so now we not only have an end-of-the-year test, but now we have to give a test at the beginning of the year to see if we've taught for a whole year and they have a whole year worth of game. Well, as a teacher, if I'm evaluated on that, am I going to wait and find out at the end of the year how I'm doing? No. So now I can see it coming. They're going to request us to do a monthly. Where are we at? So the state can see and not wait till the end of the year how we are.
Well, they want real-time feedback. But again, what works in the corporate world is one thing. And I agree that, a school is a business in the sense of a budget and being fiscally responsible. But our children are not products. They are not robots to be trained and programmed. So, again, you get rid of all of that nonsense. To me, after the children, I would think that the teachers and the principals, more so than the superintendent, because quite honestly, the superintendent is far more interested, I think, in his letter grade for his building in his district and for the funding. They're more on the treasurer side of things. Your principal, though, primarily, I think back to my principal. I knew all my principals. They were a part of your education system, or experience, rather. Your principal was in charge of determining whether Sally was a good teacher. And if your principal wasn't doing a good job at that, and then the letter grade or the evaluation for the school was going down, the superintendent would deal with the principal. If the superintendent wasn't doing his job, the local school board, who was elected to be in charge of the entire operation, would deal with it. As soon as you take it outside of that, and now we're about 3 rings beyond that circle, you can't deal with it that way. That's why they're doubling down. They can't assess on a personal level. They aren't doing anything on a personal level. So they have to have this egregious data collection to try and manage it from DC. I mean, that is, again, the second most points you could get on a one line item on that rubric was how you were going to get your teacher evaluations organized to that rubric, basically aligned to the federal dictate. Now, no reasonable person would think that the federal government and the U.S. Department of Education has a better idea of what is expected out of teachers in Glandorf's elementary school than the teachers and parents of Glandorf. But that's what we've accepted. And that's exactly what's happening. And the only way they can control it from 3,000 miles away is by data collection.
And that's the thing that bothered me. And I thought to myself, I was sitting at a meeting, the race at the top, and information came back to our school that we didn't receive a B, but received a D, and it boiled down to an attendance problem at the high school, and they could pinpoint it down to the 2 students. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what kind of ramifications could occur that you can actually identify who it is? What would a school, not out of Glandorf, of course, who would do this, but what could a school do to get those kids out of their systems, get them to alternative schools, send them somewhere so they're not going to count against us? And it shocked me that that data is available. It should stay here. They don't need that data down there.
And that's the whole thing. The barrier that had to be removed is any barrier linking the student to the teacher at every single class. You know, so when they say, well, this isn't identifiable, or there's a student ID, first off, as we saw from Obamacare, they can't get home visits unless they know who Sally is. Putting that aside, if you have your teacher, your 3rd grade, or let's say your 8th grade history teacher, is linked to student 1, 2, 3, well, let's see, there's 20 kids in that class, half of them are female, so okay, now we're down 10. You go through the other pieces that are available in their, just in terms of where they live, their zip codes, so on and so forth. But by the end of the day, a few steps later rather, you know exactly who that child is. And that's by design. I mean, one of the things I didn't have in here is what they did to the FERPA law, which is the Family Educational Rights Protection Act. That was a 1974 act at the federal level. The purpose of that was to protect family and student data in the education system. In 2011, Arne Duncan, by executive fiat, basically just blew open and abolished it for all intent and purposes. Now, the rule change reads that anyone, basically using the right language, can get any data on any child as long as they state they have an educational purpose for it. Because what happened was they realized that the data is going to come from Park and Smarter Balance to the feds, and the feds were under their own law to not be able to use it. So they changed their own act, because that's exactly what they want to do. And then I would also contend and take it to the other side in terms of punishment to the teacher. How hard would it be to get rid of all of your conservative teachers, or all your teachers that want to go rogue or just aren't near as pliable? You don't see the test they take. You don't see the results. You're an underperforming teacher. I have everything I need to get rid of you. That's the other piece of this, the fact that we don't see any of it. I mean, the teacher's being evaluated. 50% of her evaluation is based on this test. She doesn't see it. She doesn't grade it. She has no input on it. I mean, it's amazing that our superintendents will defend that. Yes?
So these achievement tests, you're saying in every, like my 3rd grade daughter is going to take that on a computer, not on paper?
Right.
Is
The
that
national, the PERC assessments
okay?
will have to be all done online. What's happened is many schools don't have the bandwidth or the technology, so they're allowing them, giving them a year of grace for paper and pencil. But again, the idea, at least what they're saying, it has to be online, which facilitates all kinds of other nefarious things, is we're trying to get real-time data so that the teacher can react to it.
So can I have the right to see her work after she's completed that test?
According to what I read yesterday, there was a legal case, the precedent said that yes, you do. But currently, no, you don't. In a meeting with Senator Faber, he said what he was so upset about was not necessarily the standards right now, but he was absolutely offended that when he, as a Senate president, asked to see the PERC assessments, he was told no. That came from him. So I'm sure you're going to be met with the same type of attitude probably as, Superintendent Steiner, particularly if it's the test that currently is being utilized as a benchmark. I think that's why all of this, was so awful with Sarah, was the idea that if you take them out of the pilot testing, we're already going to have a diminished benchmark. And they want to prove that the kids are not where they need to be. because they want to look like they are the saviors. They want to show you the Common Core standards were the answer to everybody's prayer. And people like me are just nutcases. But they've already ensured that's going to happen. Because beyond the college entrance exam, and the request for proposal that Park had to do and Smarter Balance to get their grant dollars from the federal government, Ohio had a 100% participation rate among all of our state universities, that they are now prohibited from requiring any student who graduated from a Common Core curriculum, they may not, they are prohibited from making them take remedial classes. So guess what happens to remediation rates that they tell us are 40%? They plummet. And they say, look, Common Core is working. But what they've really done is absolutely what they haven't destroyed already in higher ed, they took care of with that. Because now K through 12 and the National Public Association, who owns the copyright to the standards, are now going to dictate what is college and career ready, or I should say college ready, to higher ed, not the other way around. Because to me, just the fact that if the remediation rates are accurate at 40%, then to me the onus goes back to the college and you say, why did you admit them? Why don't you send them back to where they obviously didn't complete? That to me tells you already that the system has been destroyed. If they are allowing 40% of their freshman class into a college that needs remediation needs. And the only reason they do that, again, is government interference, because you can get a federal government loan, or a student loan, no matter what your background is, no matter what you're studying, no matter whatever means you're going to have to pay it back. So they charge the same for remedial classes as they charge for your higher classes. So again, it's just a system that they have built, and we've gone along and accepted it. But this is the last thread. We will not know education as my generation certainly did, or anyone older. Yes?
Two-part question. When we were in Columbus, I believe I heard one of the speakers say that the Park assessment was requesting at this point, not requiring, but requesting over 400 data points per student, including baptismal certificates, family income source, and am I correct in that?
If you are. Religion, political, and even though the child obviously is not a registered voter, the child's going to, there's answers there that allow them to determine where that child's family falls. And again, that's now part of their electronic record. One of the other things that Jane Robbins said, that's permanent. Never is that ever going to be removed. If they have a bad year in 6th grade and they seek the school counselor, that's now part of their permanent record. Their employer will see that if they so choose. Because remember, this is training. This is workforce development. And the government would have you believe they're paying for it. But they're not paying for it. We are. We're the taxpayer. And again, that's just a shift of thought process as to who is really in charge here, monetarily and in terms of authority.
And the second part of that is this is part of a larger problem. It's a societal problem. And what are you seeing that's effective in speaking to people about, this is going to cost us to change course. There's no reason, this is really, obviously without violence, this is a revolution for our Constitution and for our values. What are you seeing effective in promoting that and speaking with people who, on the flip side of this, the promise is this is going to be easy and we'll take care of everything for you. And, I just was looking around the room today, most of the people gathered in this room are, mature adults. I think, I had the privilege of being raised in a home that honored military and patriotism and honored values, in some aspects. What are you seeing effective in portraying that as a call to arise as a society?
To me, this is, again, unlike anything else, including Obamacare, because this is literally a kitchen table issue. It comes out of the backpacks every day and hits the kitchen table. This has the ability, I believe, as a revolution trigger, a peaceful revolution, in the sense of people realizing, okay, this is why it matters, and I have to do something now. To me, in terms of cost, we can't afford not to. As a society, as a culture, as a people, that's where the costs really lie. Again, coming back to the cost of Common Core, the fundamental change to Americans' education in every single classroom, not one single cost projection was done. Because you don't need to when the federal government doesn't have a budget. You'll just offer the money, you'll just print the money, borrow it, whatever. That's how they've gotten us this far. That's why we've got 17 trillion in U.S. debt. What they did was they did a cost estimate to get us out of Common Core, which I find laughable in Columbus. Much of what we basically beg for these dollars for are to do nothing more than continue the mandates they've imposed upon us. To me, it would be interesting to find out how much we spend on just that we wouldn't even need to have if we weren't following their mandates. But if you get back to cost, Common Core is a perfect example too. Classical instruction. Why do you need to have new math books every 7 years? Or every 3 years, I think, is actually on a rotation basis. Our speaker on April 9th was the mathematician. He said his dissertation for his PhD was to compare textbooks, math textbooks from 1890, I believe it was, to 1920, and 1920 to now. He said it was incredible, the difference. It was so pervasive, the dumbing down of mathematics instruction. And he believes that that is a part of what has happened to our children. That they're devalued. You talk about math anxiety, kids can't do normal math. He believes math is a part of basically living in your environment and God's creation. And so when you're turned off from math, you lose a part of your life's experience beyond what it does to you academically. But to me, the Catholic schools, the best thing they could do, since they're not under, they do not have to adopt the standards. Catholic schools could go and say, we're going to buy a set of classical textbooks, and we're only going to replace them when they wear out. You don't need new reading books, ELA books, classical literature books, math books. I mean, again, it's a $600 billion a year market because of that. Because they always have some newfangled way to teach. Kids haven't changed. I mean, our culture's changed, but quite honestly, that's the destruction of the federal government too. 1965. When you destroy the family, you destroy the very fabric of our country. And they succeeded at doing that. But a child from poverty can learn just like any other child. But our system is rigged. He actually spoke, which is heartbreaking, when he was the trainer for math and science education at Oklahoma City schools, which included a lot of urban schools. There was 5,000 children assigned to special ed due to their mathematics and probably their other subjects as well. He went in and used the Saxon program and what they call the salad approach. And at the end of the year, half of those kids tested out. Not only tested out, tested above average in mathematics. These are ghetto kids, as they call them. He wasn't given a pat on the back or a raise or promotion. The program was ended, and he was told, you know how much money you cost us? We got twice as much for those special ed kids than we do for the regular kids. That's what happens when the local school board is not doing their job. You can't stop that otherwise because you don't know what's going on. And ultimately, everybody besides you, as the child's parent, is motivated ultimately by money. Money and power. And the fastest way to get power is to have a lot of money, as Bill Gates has shown us. I mean, he has basically purchased American education because he has enough money to do so. So unless you are a forebearer on the front line and your local school board is doing their job that you elected them to do, you are not going to be able to reset this. It has to be at the local level, it has to be community-driven and parent-driven.
I understand that the standards and stuff are kind of like a one-size-fits-all. So if you have a classroom of, like 25 kids, and you have some kids that are, they're going to need some extra help in some kind of way, and then you have other kids are bored out of their mind because everything is way too easy or whatever for them. How did they teach this? How did they handle a classroom where the thing is one size fits all?
I mean, this is No Child Left Behind on steroids. No Child Left Behind had that. That's why they were running up against these benchmarks where every child had to be able to read at a certain grade level by 2014. But that's just not feasible. That doesn't work. They say that we're falling behind internationally. That's because, again, they're comparing apples to oranges. In our country, we educate all children. Handicapped, disabled, learning disabilities, whatever it may be. And we test all of them. If you have a handicap, first off, you don't even go to school in many of these countries, even in developed countries. But interestingly, if you go and you look at when the standards that Massachusetts had before they took the bribe, they had the highest performing standards in the country. They had set records on consistency of outperforming on the NAEP, which is our national test. We have a test currently that we've had for 25 years, I believe, that compares states to states on all levels. We don't need a national assessment. But they used to compete in the TIMSS, which is the Math and Science Global Test, as an independent country. And they rated right up there in the top 3 of the Asian countries. And if you look at that, that is exactly who and what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be 50 little laboratories, called competitive federalism. And the idea of the states initially was, how can Ohio be more free than Indiana? Because that means people will live here. Now it's like, which state can I get the most out of? Seems to be where people gravitate to. But the idea was that we were all sovereign, independent states, which was beautiful in terms of competitive federalism because instead of adopting Common Core, if Ohio really had an education crisis, you would say, well, what state's doing better than everybody else? Let's do what Massachusetts is doing, and we'll try it here. They didn't do that. Again, they assigned David Coleman to do it and used Bill Gates' dollars to get it done. Competitiveness, whether it's a child, the degrees of difference in an individual classroom, not just the microcosm. But that's why we have professionals in the classroom. I mean, again, the devaluation of the teacher, basically making him nothing but an administrator, a facilitator, what I used to call proctor, just here's what I'm supposed to say to the kids, and they take this test, but somebody else prepared it. And we were asking our teachers to have master's degrees so they can read a script to their kids and not even prepare the test to evaluate. Again, we need to go back to our teachers own their classrooms, our principals evaluate those teachers on a personal, individual level to the community standards set by the local school board. That's the hierarchy. Columbus, getting back to the revolution, the best thing Ohio could do is get rid of their state school board, in my opinion.
So I agree with the message today, and I want deeply for this to succeed. And so I guess I thought about advice for how to help it succeed. And so I think part of the message could be sharpened a bit. We touched on Lenin saying, "Give me the minds of the children for 4 years, and no one will ever uproot the seeds I've sown." And so when you say that they're creating a workforce, I think that they're creating a voter base. Because they recognize that right now that a large portion of the population will go ideologies that go along with that are ingrained in upcoming voters, then they don't have to worry about promising new and increasing benefits to those people because they'll be predisposed to believe in that ideology to begin with. So I think that's the real challenge here. So if we want to win an election or change the direction here, we need to do it soon because we're becoming a minority quickly.
Definitely.
The other comment that I'll phrase carefully, but you said that if the other side can show that statistics have improved because they changed the way the statistics are measured, then they can say that your nutcases are not whichever you said. I think that the other way to sharpen the message is to avoid blaming everyone because then it does make it too easy to be targeted at the radicalism or nut job. So we have to recognize that some big business, their pockets are lined with government money. And so some big businesses make a living from the government, and certainly their bias that is shifted by the money they receive. But the vast majority of big businesses can't stand the Obama administration and the level of regulation that has gone on. So we don't want to lump all big businesses in as the bad guy, because then
No, I agree.
like radicals. Likewise, we can't.
No, I love capitalism.
Right.
It's not crony
We
capitalism.
can't do that to all wealthy individuals either. Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg have strong political views that they try to push with their money. I manage investments for high net worth individuals, and more than 9 out of 10 of them have strong conservative backgrounds, especially first generation wealthy. Fourth and fifth generation inherited wealthy tend to have flipped. But again, I don't want this message to come off as anti-business or anti-wealth, because then it seems like we don't like anybody or we're mad at everybody. And
No, that's a good point.
The message a little bit, I think that it can gain traction quicker.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing to point out about that, those who didn't have a problem with, there are a lot of, I would say, more left-leaning organizations, particularly some teacher groups or at least teacher union leaders who have a problem with the big business side of this, but they don't have a problem with the Fed side of this. And my argument would be the only reason Bill Gates got into your classroom is because you let the federal government in your classroom. So again, rather than having these factions of like, well, I don't like it because of this, I don't like it because of that, we all need to get on board with, we all want the same thing, or at least all those of us that do want the same thing, that pull all that aside. We are going to do what it takes to reclaim local authority over our schools, classrooms, and children. And that begins, quite honestly, at the ballot box, making sure that you're electing representatives that will vote and listen to you in Columbus. Again, we are a sovereign state. We just, as Judge Roberts put it, the only thing he got right on that, sometimes you have to act like it. But they're not going to do anything they don't have to do in Columbus. It's a path of least resistance. The other point that you talk about in terms of voters, I was just told yesterday, I believe it was a 10th grader, their whole assignment was on why the college board should be, or the college board, presidential college. Thank you. Why that should be abolished. Moving us back away from representative republicanism, or a representative republic, to a democracy, which is just mob rule. That eliminates all the flyover states when you get rid of that. Because, it comes down to exactly what the founders feared, which is a true democracy. We are not. We are actually a representative or constitutional republic.
Right.
And that is critical. And that is nowhere to be found, by the way, in anything that I've seen in those standards. The standards in the textbooks refer to us as a democracy, with no narrative or modifier beginning. Just a flat-out democracy. And all democracies are mob rule, 50 plus 1, and they all decide that that guy gets hung by the tree. So Again, it's nefarious, it's insidious, and there's probably a multitude of, quote, agendas going on, but none of them serve our children, and certainly none of them serve our country. But I take your point, that's very, very well received. It is, there's no blanket across this. Quite honestly, short of parents, I've found people on both sides of it in every other area, but I have yet to find a parent that is fighting to keep Common Core. That seems to be the one contingent that is solid, and it's really the only one that counts.
Also, I just wanted to mention, I've got a question from somebody out in the crowd, but I wanted to mention the school boards. Putnam County Parents and Teachers Against Common Core can be found on Facebook, and again, we'll have a lot of these videos up. We have addressed Continental School Board, Lipstick, Ottawa Glandorf, Grove, Miller City, the other one's Judy Schrader, Jenny Mack, and Glenn Carhoff, and myself. There's no need to fear in any capacity your local school board. Number one, because they lack power and it's being usurped daily. So even if you can convince them, the part assessment, the consortium from a national level has usurped them already, including Ohio Revised Code as regard to FERPA and other issues. So don't fear anybody locally at all. Address them. And also opt out. The opt-out forms are on our website. But one of the questions here is, what can parents do to save our children against the dangers of Common Core? It's a very general question, but what can they do? And then how can we educate parents about Common Core? A lot of people simply don't know about this. I guess I would start the answer, you can finish it, but by saying, share information on the web, email everybody that you can talk to, because we need more than 5 people going to the revolution. We need big numbers opting out to mess up the assessment and also to start people on the path of understanding that you are not alone, your state is not alone, and multiple people are going after this. But if you could address that, Heidi.
Well, in some ways it's almost a problem because there's so much information out there. So if you just tell somebody, well, do some research, they're going to come across more information probably than they can take in order to be able to organize it. Again, it comes down to this is a federal overtake of education, of standards that are copyrighted, paid for by the feds, a national assessment. I mean, again, it really wouldn't matter who was in the White House and if these were the best standards ever. Because you have given up control over that. And once you give up that authority, you never get it back. We cannot allow them to basically seal the deal, put this final nail in the coffin with these national standards and a national test. Because that's it. You do not return from there. We've got to get it repealed. In terms of, I guess, in generalities about Common Core, there's a number of videos, but I would say if you're speaking to an Ohioan, have them go out and watch at least, at a minimum, the 30-minute highlight video that Roy put together from our event on April 9th. He pulled out, selectively, and he did a fabulous job of pointing out the points that really strike people. Jamie Gass speaks to the illegalities of it and how the administration and other political authorities pulled this off. Jane Robbins speaks to the data, and it'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. How deeply entrenched this already is, and we didn't even know it. Megan Koshnick speaks to the psychological issues and how developmentally inappropriate these standards are. Stan Hartzler is the mathematician, and it's heartwarming to have an educator who is so moved by the fact of what these children aren't being taught and what it's going to do not only to their minds, but to their souls. And then Terrence Moore ends it with a call, he ends his book in the same way. As far as, if we take back our stories, we'll take back our classrooms, and we'll pray to God we can take back our nation. That is the path. The path to restoring our nation is in the classroom. But the parents have to do it. They have to do it in the entity of a parent, in the identity of a taxpayer, as a voter, the whole gamut. You can't just sit there as a parent and talk to your girlfriends and say, this is horrible. You've got to get engaged, you've got to know the process, and nobody likes to be involved in politics. Most of us don't anyway. It's usually a very dirty game. You have to know what the hierarchy is and what the rules are, because you've got to play. Because otherwise you're governed by, someone of less authority. It's the old thing of, what's life? It's showing up. You've got to show up. You've got to not just be involved and educate, you've got to be involved. Take that next step, find out how one individual can make a difference. And everybody can.
I just want to make a comment and thank that teacher for showing up and speaking.
Yes, thank you.
Because
you have to go be informed.
we had that discussion ourselves where I talk to teachers myself personally who are wonderful teachers that are losing their desire to teach. And where are they today? Are they told to be quiet or are they told to not have an opinion? Well, I don't see any teachers with my kids. But so I applaud you for speaking out. That's very brave. And one quick question out of all this. Is there any hope in the future to abolish the Department of Education at all?
The U.S. Department of Education? Yes. That would solve all life's troubles, wouldn't it? Ironic, I find that to be the biggest miss on Reagan's part. I mean, that actually used to be a part of the Republican platform. And Reagan said that was one of the things, one of his priorities, and obviously it didn't happen. But with the current culture in Washington, I don't see how that happens. And again, it comes back to rather than looking to the feds to do something right, which they don't, we need to look to our, best government is government closest to you. That's your local school board members that you elect, and that's your state rep and your state senator. Those are the people that you need to know very well. They need to know you very well. They need to know when you call them that you mean business and you're not going away. That you have your facts and your ducks in a row. I mean, one of the things, in defense of the legislators, I had one tell me, well, we can't be an expert on everything. I agree. But if you're not an expert and you're sitting on the education committee, then please don't vote to put in a law that affects me and my children. Then don't vote on it, or say it needs to go through more of a legislative process. I'm not asking for perfection in Columbus, but I am asking for them to realize what they're dealing with. Again, this is not just public policy. And for some of the teachers, what I have found, more so a few months ago, but they said, this is just the latest fad. This will go away like everything else has gone away. And on the one paper that you have, it's kind of like a short 50-year summary of how we got here. But that's the worst thing you can do is think this is a fact. As you saw, this is just the progression. This is what the incrementalism has brought us to. This is not going away. The only reason we have this is because the other fads, as they were described, they were part of the process. They were the march to get to here. I think some teachers have resolved themselves if there's nothing they can do, so they're going to make the best of it. But I'll tell you, I had yet, it was one year, had made a presentation that there wasn't a teacher that has either retired before they planned to or flat out quit over it. So I guess I would by far prefer for the teachers to align with the parents. Because then again, you have a powerful voice. A lot of teachers are moms. I remember Jim Jordan telling me years ago, because I spoke to him about school choice. He said, there is nothing more powerful than a mom walking into my office with her child in her hand. That moves mountains. That is what we have to become. We have to become these like mommy platoons. Everyone in here, but particularly the moms, because we tend to have those groups. Take 10 of your friends and go early vote. Before the primary May 6th, before a kid comes down sick or somebody's late to soccer or whatever. Go as a group and vote. And then go out to lunch and kind of celebrate the fact that you're getting engaged and you're taking back the piece that's been missing, which is control over your child. That will go a long way in encouraging other people. Sarah Lewis was a lone ranger when she opted out in Salina. There was dozens that followed her after that. The one person does make a difference. Most people don't want to be the first, but they're happy to be the second. So keep that in mind, that maybe it's your turn to be the first.